Welcome, everyone. I'm very delighted to welcome you all to this event. I'm very grateful for the time that you took to participate. My name is Mahjabeen Dhala. I'm the Assistant Professor of Islamic Studies here at the GTU, and I'm also the Director of the Madrasa-Midrasha program that has been so well led by Professor Dina Aronoff and Dr. Munir Jiwa of the Center for Jewish Studies and Center for Islamic Studies, respectively, here at the GTU. We're also very grateful to the generous grant of the Walter and Elise Haas Foundation that makes these dialogues possible between our two traditions, and the whole program is intended to advance that dialogue within the Academy and beyond. In this event, we're going to be looking at um, our two seasons that we've just shared, Passover, and then of course, Ramadan, which the Muslims are in at the moment. And we have Dr. Sam Shonkoff and Dr. Kamal Abu-Shamsieh as our esteemed presenters today. Before I hand it over to them, I want to just share a brief introduction. Dr. Sam Shonkoff is the Taube Family Assistant Professor of Jewish Studies at the GTU. He teaches Jewish religious thought, modern Jewish cultures and methods in theology, ethics, and the historical cultural study of religions. His research focuses primarily on German Jewish thought and Hasidism, as well as appropriations of Hasidic spirituality in relatively secular spheres. Before he came to the GTU, Dr. Shonkoff taught at Oberlin College and at the University of Chicago. Our next presenter, Dr. Kamal Abu-Shamsieh, is the director of the Interreligious Chaplaincy program here at the GTU and the assistant professor of practical theology here. He founded the Ziyara Muslim Spiritual Care and has extensively traveled over the Arab and Muslim countries, teaching chaplains in their field. Since 2012, he has also served as a chaplain at Stanford Hospital and Clinics, and he completed his PhD recently in 2019 here at the GTU, where he examined Prophet Muhammad's dying experience as a good death model for an Islamic practical theology for end-of-life care. Without further ado, I would like to welcome our two speakers. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and thank you for each and every one of you who took this time to join us today. And Sam, if I can invite you to begin. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mahjabeen. I just want to say, first of all, we just should all celebrate still you joining us as a professor here at the GTU and directing the Madrasa-Midrasha program. Very, very exciting moment for all of us here. And thank you for this invitation. And Kamal, always a pleasure to be in dialogue with you, and really looking forward to this conversation. And of course, Matthew Hartman, perhaps invisible on this call, but is just extraordinarily helpful with these programs. So we're turning to spirituality today. Spirituality in this season of holidays of Ramadan, of the holiday of Passover, or Pesach, and the 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuot in the Jewish tradition. And spirituality is, it's of course this very commonly used word. And what does it mean? I was reflecting on this and thinking about where I wanted to go in bringing some thoughts today. In my mind, the way I'm thinking about that right now, at least, is that when we are bringing our attention to the spiritual dimension of these traditions, it's getting out of the head in some ways, right? These are not just words anymore that accompany these religious practices, the names of the holidays, the terms. and even the practices. This is no longer just in the realm of knowing what is commanded of us or what is normative and being obedient to that, but it is also bringing awareness to the experiential dimension, to the process, to moments of transformation, moments of illumination, moments of darkness, the perplexities, the challenges along the way, and really just the full textured reality of the experience, the way that we're touched along the way. And I think that when we bring our mindfulness to that aspect of practice, I find it to be the most interesting part, personally. And I also think that that opens up just really rich territory for people from different traditions, meeting one another, in that experiential place. So right now we are just over 3 weeks deep into a 7-week process in Jewish tradition. 22 days ago, we had Pesach, Passover, and at the end of a 7-week process, it will be the holiday of Shavuot, literally meaning weeks, referring to these weeks leading up to it. That's how it's originally described in the Torah. And what these two holidays are, Passover is perhaps the more famous one, familiar one of the most observed holidays on the Jewish calendar among Jews, is sort of the paradigmatic holiday of liberation. This is celebrating, in narrative terms, the Exodus from Egypt. And the holiday of Shavuot, according to the rabbinic imagination, is the celebration of Sinai. This is the holiday of revelation. This is the commemoration of receiving Torah at Mount Sinai. And so when we have this period, this really fertile expanse of time between these holidays of liberation and revelation, right, that opens up huge questions and draws our attention to ways in which liberation and freedom are really only the beginning. That freedom itself is not for its own sake. It's not the end of the story, but actually this is the moment when we go from Mitzrayim, the Hebrew term for Egypt, but that also without changing any of the letters whatsoever, just with a different pronunciation, those letters could be pronounced Metzarim, the narrow straits, the narrow places. There's a lot of commentaries drawing on that imagery in the tradition. And when we break out of that place of narrowness, of constriction, we enter the Midbar, the wilderness, the desert. Those same letters, again, can be just pronounced differently. There's no vowels in the Torah telling us how to pronounce these things. It could be also pronounced medaber. This is a place of speaking. This is a place of thinking, of searching, and of meeting one another, of communication. And it's if Metzarim, right, it was a place of narrowness, this is the epitome of vastness that we enter in this period. And to get from freedom to revelation, right, to get from liberation to Sinai, not just as a historical geographic journey that we can talk about, but again, as a spiritual journey, as a psychological journey, then we have to ask, like, how do we get there? Right? How do we go from a place of finally having the freedom to seek that, But how do we actually get closer to the so-called mountain of God? How do we prepare ourselves? How do we cultivate um, conditions for revelation to happen in our lives? And this is we're in the middle of that journey right now in Jewish time. And this period between the holidays, between liberation and revelation, Pesach and Shavuot, is we count these days one by one. And this goes back to an ancient Israelite custom of Sfirat HaOmer, of counting sheaves of wheat. These were originally related to temple offerings, as these two holidays of Pesach and Shavuot were two of the three pilgrimage festivals to the temple in Jerusalem. But Rabbinic Judaism is at bottom a diasporic tradition. And so this imagery of Sfirat HaOmer, of counting sheaves of wheat, becomes spiritualized, as it were, becomes internalized and psychologized to be a process of marking days, marking the footsteps of this journey from narrowness to revelation. And there's a practice that comes to be associated with this that has just profound theological, spiritual implications that I find fascinating, and I want to share it as my log to throw on the fire here for us thinking together. The 7 weeks of this journey in the Kabbalistic Jewish mystical imagination bring up associations with the 7 lower sfirot, right? So we were talking about Sfirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omers. The sfirot, or the spheres, the emanations of God in Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, this is at once a mapping of divine consciousness. It's a mapping of human consciousness. It's a mapping of the body. And it's a map of the cosmos itself and the dynamics therein. And so these 7 weeks of counting become 7 weeks of inner reflection on these particular aspects of being, aspects of divinity. The first week is the week of chesed, the week of love. The second week is the week of gevura, of power or judgment or boundaries. The third week is tiferet, which is understood to be the balancing between a sort of unbounded, unconditional mercy and love on one hand, and a spirit of judgment and boundary on the other hand, both of which can get really out of hand in excess. Tiferet brings us to what's associated with the heart, the torso of the body of existence, which is a place of beauty. And we go down from there, where each week we bring attention to one of those dimensions, which we see inwardly and we see also in the world around us, to bring awareness to those aspects of being. And then each day within the week, right? Each of the 7 days within these 7 weeks becomes a particular permutation. So the first day would be chesed shebechesed, the love that is in love. The second day would be gevura shebechesed. In what ways do I find places of boundary, power, judgment in love? And each day of this 49-day period becomes this very particular cocktail of spiritual, psychological, relational, ethical, theological emanations to bring awareness to. And I'll just end by thinking about today. Today is number 22. Like I said, we're 22 days after Pesach. And so that means that we are in the very beginning of the 4th week right? We've gone through 3 full weeks, and today we begin the week of Netzach, which is literally eternity. It's also associated with the right leg of the body. But also etymologically, Netzach has tones of eternity, but also of a sense of like conquering, right? Of like self-satisfaction, of ambition. So it comes right after Tiferet, where we've sort of found that balance between love and judgment, and we found that perfect place of beauty that's the balance of the two. And where does that take us? Yes, I did it. I am so spiritually sophisticated. I did it, and I'm on my way. And of course, that is a new challenge of where the ego kicks in. And where the flip side, if we can dissolve that self-satisfaction, we can dissolve that pride and ambition, we see that a kind of eternity opens up there. That eternity is the flip side of that same sphira. And today is the first day of that week, so it's Chesed Shebenetzach. Where is the love that is in eternity? Also the right arm. Bringing attention today to the full right side of the body. But even in that place of ambition, of ego, tomorrow we'll look at the judgment and sense of power that's associated with that. But today, where's the love actually that's in that? When I bring that kind of gusto and desire to growth and to spirituality, where's actually the beautiful love that also animates that journey? So all of us will find that cocktail of Chesed Shebenetzach, the love that's in eternity, will mean something different for each of us on this day. But I'll leave us with that personal note.
Thank you so much for those reflections, really. Such profound cyclical thought that engages the body, the mind, the emotions, the person, and the community. Before I ask Dr. Kamal to step in with his reflection, I just want to add that you have the Q&A feature here. So if questions arise as you're listening to the profound reflections of our speakers and the questions emerge for you, please make a note of them there. And at the end of the program, we will be opening it up to your questions and maybe engage both of our speakers for reflections on their own presentations. So thank you so much, and keep the questions coming. Dr. Kamal Abu-Shamsieh, if I may invite you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dalla. Thank you, Sam. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Today is the first week. We have completed the first week of Ramadan, going into the second week. Some people might wonder, what is Ramadan? And today I'll be reflecting on the meaning and the purposes behind the fasting and draw some spiritual lessons from the fasting. Before the advent of Islam, the Arabs used the lunar calendar, and Ramadan is the name of the 9th month on the calendar. And this month gained significance after the advent of Islam, when the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, received the first revelation in the night of Qadr, in the night of destiny. And in this is the first spiritual lesson that we draw, that the Quran was revealed in the month of Ramadan. It was revealed during the night, at a time of ignorance, at a time of what referred to as Jahiliyyah, lawlessness, lack of ethics, lack of laws, and came to deliver the communities from the darkness of the night into the light of God. This morning, I started fasting at 5:05 p.m. and will continue for another more than 2 hours. At 7:36, I'll be breaking the fast. Altogether, over 14 hours of fasting. During that time, there will be no food or drink, including water or coffee, my favorite, during the hours of fasting. This intense and recurring fast take place for 30 days. And this is in it is the time for reflection, personal reflection, for self-discovery, increase of resilience, compassion, and also work on our growing edges. There are numerous objectives that people can draw, that you can look at the diversity of the community, but most notably, there is a hadith or a prophetic narrative that this month is a great month that came upon you that has three themes. The first of it, the first 10 days of it is a mercy. The second 10 days of it is forgiveness. And the third part of it is deliverance and salvation from the hellfire. So Muslims take this fast intentionally and mindfully, and those who prepare for it spiritually will be the ones who will get the most out of it. So we have a focus and awareness of the presence of God, and that is when we focus our attention during this month, and with extra intention of doing the commands, what God has commanded us to do, which is abandoning what is been forgiven, what is been forbidden unto us, and indulging in acts of kindness, humility, thankfulness. Like any other ritual, it has a meaning, it has lessons, and I will reflect on three areas in it, is what this has been for me personally, for the community and the relationship with God. That is the most spiritual element of Ramadan, is the self-awareness of where you connect within yourself, the community around you, and with the Creator. Similar to any other practice or pillar in Islam, the fasting has come with an ethical component of it. For example, it was revealed in Quran 29:45 in Surah Al-Ankabut about prayers, that prayers prohibits immorality and wrongdoing. So those who are constant in their prayers are mindful about the vices that one has, and always striving to stay away from it. During the time of Hajj, the pilgrims are always instructed to stay away from arguments, from abuse, from lewdness. So there is some ethical component throughout the entire period of Hajj. Charity, which is sadaqah or zakat, that is to give on one hand that the other hand does not know it. In other words, to stay away from show off and stay away from talking about what you're giving, and that what nullifies the act of purification, the self-purification, which when you bring shame onto those who receive the charity, and in that way you injure them. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said about fasting that it is meaningless to fast unless one intentionally be mindful about slander and false testimony. So be mindful about what you engage in, what you say. And this month is the most spiritual month that is unmatched. We'll talk about some of the aspects of fasting that I can see that people are attached to and will draw from the tradition. Because for a Muslim, looking at the tradition that has given to us, looking at the normative texts, what Allah in the Quran gave to us, what the Prophet, peace be upon him, demonstrated in the tradition. And in the hadith, Allah said that fasting is mine. It belongs to Allah, belongs to God, addressing humanity to give up things that are otherwise lawful unto you, sexual passion, food and drink, and give it up temporarily. And for those who do that, have two joys. The first joy is when you break the fast, and that is every single night. And the second joy is the connectedness when you're being with God. So when we look at food and hunger, when we move away from what daily habits of eating and temporarily suspending that, we look at the greatest effort during that fast, which is the connection with God. And the connection in the Arabic language is called dhikr, or the remembrance. So we remember God during this entire time, intentionally and insistently we call on God during that time. How do we do that? It can be done during worship, during prescribed prayer, and it can be during thoughts. You go out and you wonder. You look at the sun. Yesterday was in the 70s where I live, and today it is in the mid 80s, and you wonder, where is the relief is going to come? You look at the smell the food, and you wonder and you thank God for what is being given to us. So we look at the reflection for the purposes of the meaning, the blessings, the trials, the challenges, and also the opportunities that is being given to us. Yet it is a race against time. Ramadan lasts only 30 months. And we wish it is staying for more, because it is a time when we abstain for, it's an intense time of worship. Cut down on social media. That is unnecessary time for chatting, but at the same time, be mindful of families and call your families frequently. It's a time of education where we are in the pandemic. We have access to global scholars that will share with us knowledge. So time of the essence. The second time, it's a time for family and communities. Prior to COVID, we used to break the fast every single night with the company of the communities and our families. Last year was the most difficult one, least spiritual fast. This year, with many have been vaccinated, we are able to, while socially distanced, bring people together and we break a meal. On the lighter side, Ramadan is the only time where I invite my family and friends to dinner and no one will ask me at what time. We become in sync with the cosmos. We know when the sun is setting. We know when the moon is rising. We know when the prayer and the worship is happening. At the same time, it's a time for charity. And charity here, I would like to define it as the purifying rituals and dues that we give, something that we love to keep for ourselves. And for the sake and for the love of God and the creation, we give it away. And at this time of the day, for me, is the least productive when energy is at its lowest. Ramadan is a time to balance between worship and between our own needs. And in this case, self-care is very much needed as important. So it makes no sense to fast all day, and at time of breaking the fast, you fill your stomach to fullness. And it makes no sense to stay up all night in worship and sleep all day and wake up at the time of the fast to break the fast. So there is some balance in between. Also, Ramadan is a time of justice and altruism. When we voluntarily give up food and drink while fasting, some people say at this time we connect with the poor. And I would like to offer another perspective on this. We will not be able to connect with the poor and understand what the hungry people go through just by giving up food and drink for 30 days. We might be able to sympathize because we are voluntarily giving our food, but also when you reflect on it deeply, those who don't have the means to eat, the homeless and the shelterless, are not voluntarily not eating. So next time when we are organizing campaigns to feed the hungry, We don't just pick up the food and deliver it on the weekend, as if the homeless can only eat on Sundays when we are away from our work or on the weekend. We become embodied, we become mindful of this, all in a form of gratitude. The gratitude, which is all of what we have been given, and we have been tested in the past year and so with our lives, and we have witnessed many people who lost their lives. Ramadan is a time to connect with the one who sustains and the one who will give you what you need, and whatever is not being given, I'm fully aware that it has been for a reason that we are not, our supplication is not being answered. For those who are fasting, when we look at fasting for a full month, sometimes one person will ask, what if I can't fast? And many will say, well, I'll opt for the leniencies, the rukhsa that has been given to us, and will fast at some other time, which is acceptable. Yet, the spirituality of the month cannot be duplicated. The environment, the atmosphere, the gathering, to fast with 1.5 billion people at the same time. This is the only time in the entire year where we can have that. This is the only time when everyone will wake up and fast for the same amount of time. So those are some of the lessons that I would like to share with you, and I welcome question and answers. And thank you for the Madrasa-Midrasha program.
Thank you both, Dr. Shonkoff and Dr. Abu-Shamsieh, for your very profound reflections. Before I take the questions that we have here, I just wanted to share some words that jumped out at me, and those words were love, power, liberation, and revelation. And I can see the overlaps there between these two seasons that we are commemorating. When you look at how you explained it to us, Dr. Shonkoff, and that was about the Passover being liberation and then coming up to that climax of revelation, you see that the revelation story also being played out in the month of Ramadan because of the Laylatul Qadr, which is the night that the Quran was revealed. So it's preparing the soul to sort of be liberated through this revelation. And at the same time, I also see the power, because the night of Qadr, as you explained, is the night of destiny, but it's also Qadr from Qudra, as in the night of power. Some have also interpreted as the night of power, as the descending of power, something to empower human beings with, the message. So I see these words of love and love in the month of Ramadan because Muslims are invited as guests of God. So there is this loving coming together with the love of God. But I'm also thinking of all these words. These are powerful words: love, power, liberation, revelation, and what our religious traditions sort of prepare us to understand these words, not just to understand them, but also to embody them. How much do these words make us good practicing Jews or Muslims, or do they prepare us to become active and just citizens of a larger community, right? So this is what we were trying to do today. We were trying to look at our ritual practices. How much of it is just ritually done? Can we throw in a spiritual component in there? We absolutely can. But together, how can we embody these terms and become citizens for justice, not just for our own traditions, but also for the humanity at large? And I think I've always struggled with this idea where I think human beings are spiritual. They are spiritual. I think we need to work on our humanity more than our spirituality. I think spirituality is the easy way out, but I think when we have to confront being human, that's where the challenge comes. Now, I don't want to take up, we already have some questions here, but those were just some of my short reflections. If you want to speak to them together or in any order that you might wish. Thank you.
Amen. Yeah, thank you, Mahjabeen. Incredibly powerful and important reflections, and thank you, Kamal. Yeah, I mean, I love what you say about like actually that just thinking about spirituality can sometimes be problematic in some sense, like ways that spirituality can distract us from, as you said, humanity, or from concrete reality and the site where justice is embodied and performed. But Kamal, I thought you tapped beautifully into that intersection of spirituality and ethics, and I want to reflect a bit more on that too. You know, from my perspective, and from certain strands in Jewish tradition, like any spirituality that is disengaged from interpersonal social reality is a farce, right? Like this is not worth the name. There is no. This is one of the foundational principles in the sources of this tradition, is the refusal to differentiate in any fundamental way between spirit and materiality, between the world of the body and the world of spirituality. And I think that I'd like to reflect a bit more on that with this 49-day, 7-week process towards revelation. That, like I said before, when we're bringing daily attention to the Sfirot, that is not just an internal process, right? The Sfirot are indeed a map of an inward landscape, but they're also, these are the forces. These are understood to be like the elemental forces of being itself. And so it's not only like in my own emotions or thoughts that I would bring attention to, say for today, love and eternity, but where do I see that in the world? Where do I not see that in the world? Where do I feel blockages in myself in relation? Like, where is love not flowing today as much as it could? And so from that perspective, then, something that I love about this practice is that the path to revelation is ultimately, how aware can we be? Right? That on some level, like, to actually take this process seriously, which takes a lot of work, and I've never succeeded for all 49 days consecutively, but I've come relatively close at times. But to engage in this process is to engage in like a radical process of heightened awareness to what's happening, to what is churning in reality, in existence. And I don't think that it is possible to heighten awareness without also being moved to action. I think that if we're actually bringing that level of intentional preparatory awareness to dynamics of love and power, and judgment, justice, and beauty in the world, and so on, then we must respond. And if we don't, we're doing something wrong.
Thank you, Sam. I pick up on the awareness theme because it is the difference between being knowledgeable and being unknowledgeable. And in this case is the awareness of what, the power of what that we ask, the power of the human, or the power that is being together with God or independent of God. So that's the question for a Muslim that one asks, is what is my power and what is my purpose? And the most significant question that someone will ask is, how do you know your purpose, and how do you know what you need to do? Can you know what is right on your own, or do you need God to know, to find out what things on your own? And for me as a Muslim, I look at everything that I've known is a form of sustenance that is being given to me by God. So sustenance in this case, and that is one of the names of God, is Ar-Razzaq, the provider, the one who sustains not just the universe, sustains me as well as one person within, on one drop within that universe. The awareness here is the awareness of God in me and with me. And I see it in Revelation that God said, we have closer to you than your jugular vein. It is the dignity that God dignified the offspring of Adam, all of humanity, because of the soul that is from God, belongs to God, infused in every single person of us, that will give us the recognition of our own humanity and worthiness and dignity, not independent of God. The second one, including the love that we have for one another, the love we have for our spouses, is a form of sustenance. That's what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said when he's reflecting on his love for his wife Khadija. He said, "Rizqtu hubbaha." God provided me with that love for her. So it is the mindfulness of where God is in all of our affairs, yet recognizing the omnipotence of God, that the wisdom and the mystery and the mysticism in this is we might think we know, yet the ultimate truth stays with God. The second element of it is as we look at spirituality, also we look at within what is spirituality is not independent of Sharia in this case, is not independent of the laws of Islam, is not independent of the ethics of Islam, is not independent of the boundaries that what we call penal code, that people are most aware of, but not looking at the other elements of how to love one another, how to treat one another. So those elements of the worship, which makes very small portion of the Quran, versus dealings and transaction, or how to treat one another, which occupies the vast portion of the Quran. And I see in the chat and the question that Dina asked is how to balance between those practices and the constraints. The ethics and the essence of the practice is not to endure any hardship. So if wherever there is hardship, you look for an easy way, even in practice, even in fasting. As long as whatever you do, the law says, has to be everything moral and legal. So whenever the Prophet, peace be upon him, was presented with two options, he always opted for the easiest one, as long as it is ethical. So if you are fasting and about time to travel, there is a license for you to break the fast. Well, you need to navigate for yourself. Today, if I'm driving about 300 miles from my hometown to come to Berkeley, it's relatively an easy fast. I can fast and come back within the same day, even though I have the license to break my fast. However, if I'm aware that this will be creating a hardship, then it will become compulsory on me to break the fast. Then when to make it up? I can make it up in July when it's soaring heat and over 115 degree weather where I live, or I can make it up in January. And God said, choose the easy way. So you have to balance, as long as the intention is to say, I'm not going to cheat God out of the time. I'm here to say, thank you for giving me a way out to do exactly what you want me to do, but in a way that is easy.
It's beautiful. I also might respond to your question, Dina, about constraint versus license in these traditions. And I mean, I like thinking in those terms, it's worth highlighting that these very practices that I've been talking about are literally rooted in moments of like radical creativity and license with respect to what came before it. Like I just think about these historically, that if Pesach and Shavuot were originally, like land-based agricultural festivals timed with particular rhythms of produce, from the earth and what's growing and what's not growing, to then in a diasporic context to reinterpret those very festivals in terms of liberation and revelation was already like a chutzpahdik, audacious reinterpretation in order to create meaning here and now. And the whole practice around linking the counting of the Omer with the counting or bringing that mindfulness to these different aspects of existence and being, both internally and externally and intersubjectively, like that in itself is this mostly 16th century Kabbalistic innovation that was not the original intent of these practices, but it's still like literally written into the liturgy as if it always were, saying that actually that this counting of sheaves like is actually in order to catalyze, to facilitate this process of spiritual transformation and exploration. So I have a religious anarchist in me, and I tend to be drawn, perhaps excessively at times, to the side of license. But for that reason, because I have that inclination personally in many ways, I find that also that element of constraint that you point to is all the more essential at times. Not everything should be spiritualized, right? Like for the holiday of Passover, we are told to rid the kitchen of chametz, of the leavened stuff, of the fluff, right? And like really clean out. And I could very easily just psychologize that practice and say, well, it's really about like clearing out the self, clearing out the sort of superfluous like nonsense from my relationships, investigating my, but that's actually like to actually embody these practices of, no, I have to clean my kitchen, right? Like that in itself. And I have to actually not eat leavened bread. And for this counting of the Omer, like this isn't just an idea, this is actually a daily practice. And I'm really not supposed to miss a day. I do miss days. I'll take one of these right now. But I think that, there has to be this dialectic between radical creative license and also humbly knowing that that spirituality, and this is something, Mahjabeen, that you were pointing to before, like spirituality is not just an internal process. Spirituality has to be embodied. And perhaps, if anything, these rituals and in performing actual rituals, hopefully remind us that spirituality should always be embodied, not only in those rituals, but those should be examples of how we are to conduct ourselves and realize what is merely intentional in the physical world every day.
To go back just for a second for the concept of power. And to me, I look at all that in relationship with God is do as much as you can. So in this, we're recognizing or God is telling me about my own limitation as a human being. And the license here is as much as you can. So there is an invitation to strive for excellence, but at the end of the day, don't beat up yourself. You're still a human. Do as much as you can. So that's where the balance has to be. So for that, this month now, and again, we count the days to begin the fast. At the same time, we count the days to end the fast, because we're not supposed to live our lives like this for the entire year. And that's why there is a celebration at the end of Ramadan that's called Eid. So we celebrate. Yet as a child, I remember listening to chanting from Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, where a group of people will be lamenting the end of Ramadan. They'll be mourning the end of Ramadan and asking God that it will not be the last Ramadan for us. And that is one of the supplications that we have in anticipation to this month. We say, oh God, allow us to reach Ramadan without losing anyone. And bless the months that are preceding of Ramadan, the month of Rajab, Sha'ban, and bring us to Ramadan to culminate that season of spirituality.
Thank you so much. These are profound reflections, really, and I'm seeing how this is working and playing together. You know, rituals that engage the body, and sort of have this component of, you know, nurturing the spirit. But I think one important overlap is also the experience, the experiential learning, I think, because the words that jumped out to me, love, power, liberation, revelation, these are things that can be experienced. Either you experience love or the lack of love. You experience power has an experience to it. You can't really write it down. You can't really say it out, but you just experience it. Power or the lack of power. And I think at least for the Ramadan, you know, it's hard to imagine hunger and thirst. I mean, you can write about hunger and thirst, and you can write about being denied love, but it's not until you've actually felt the pangs of hunger that you know what that experience is of, you know, seeing that cup of coffee or seeing that meal given out to you, and all those structures of injustice and inequities that deny people love, that deny them, you know, the power, the food. And I think this is perhaps another element that we can throw in there, the body, the spirit, and then the experiential learning that comes out of it. I'm cognizant of the time, and there are a couple of questions here that are directed to you, Sam, one to you, and one to you, Kamal, which I think you might have already answered, but I'm going to start with in order of appearance. So this came first. This question came first, and it's addressed to you, Sam, and it says, thank you so much for your talk. I wanted to ask a question to Sam about the ontological status of the text that is revealed at Shavuot. Is it supposed to be a manifestation of eternal wisdom, or is it a response to historical circumstances? I imagine that there are different theologies of the status of the text. That was the question to you, Sam.
I mean, that's the question of revelation, right? Like, is this something, are we just celebrating a moment of revelation that happened thousands of years ago? Are we celebrating this particular text, you know, written in black ink on animal skins and like these particular narratives, or are we celebrating a process, something that is unfolding, a revelation that is reverberating throughout time? And I would say, I mean, as you said, Thomas, you know, there's of course different perspectives on this. I think that when we're in the context of this program, especially thinking about spirituality, in my understanding, means that we're thinking about direct contact, right? Direct experience. Again, these are not just ideas. These are not just like stories, but these are realities to inhabit. And so there's really powerful traditions around the language of Hayom, of today, verses in Torah that refer to the Torah that was given in the literal language of on this day, Hayom Hazeh. And the question is raised of like, shouldn't it be that day, right? The Torah that was given that day at Mount Sinai, and no, it's the Torah that should be new to us every day. So is this then to be reduced to some sort of eternal logos, right? Some eternal word that is extricated or disentangled from the text itself? No. And this is where I think that something that I find really to be a really rich dimension of much of Jewish tradition is, again, this refusal to separate in any neat way ontologically between spirit and matter, between signifier and signified, between letter and spirit, that actually we can hold both, right? The Torah is that Torah. And the Torah is what's called traditionally the white fire behind the black fire, right? The white space itself on which those black letters are printed is also Torah, and that's the Torah whose flames and luminosity is ever unfolding, ever new, always to be discovered freshly. So yeah, Shavuot, it's not just it's remembering in the sense that Kamal was talking about, actually, of the dicker, that this is not just remembering of the past. This is a remembering, a re-embodying, re-inhabiting here and now, and those things are held in a kind of dialectic, as I understand it.
Talking about time and revelation, I just would like to share that the highest moment of spirituality for the community at large was in the last sermon that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, gave, during which it was at the Hajj, at the highest point of Hajj, the assembly of the Mount of Arafat, and I've been there. And talking about connection and spirituality, it was soaring heat for that day, and I just made a prayer. And all of a sudden, I was engulfed by this cold breeze in the middle of the desert that brings everything, melts everything down. And for the Prophet, when he gave that sermon and the revelation came, as today, talking about time, today, not any other time, today I perfected your faith for you. And today, God said, I'm pleased to announce that this will be your faith. So if this is pleasing to God, we look at this, all that what we do is hopefully the intention and the attention is being given to God, and the intention is to seek the pleasure, what is being accepted. It's not about how much I spend, it's about how and why and in what manner I spend, is it pleasing to God. So again, I look at spirituality as deeply theological concept that is deeply embedded in the tradition. It's not spirituality outside of the tradition. It's not without, I want to be respectful for every spirituality out there. It's not without a theology. For me, it is spirituality embedded with theology, embedded in the law, and embedded in the ethics of practice.
Thank you both. I have this, and I'm going to say this is our last. I'm going to say this is our last question for today, so that we are cognizant of everyone's time. And I think this is addressed to you, Kamal, and I'm going to read the question to you. I'm wondering what role time plays in these spiritual practices, the way in which fasting, changing time, or fasting, changing time, or counting changes it. Also, I know that it is partly a mourning period in Judaism. Does Ramadan contain an element of mourning? That's a question.
I think the last part of it, it was answered. Yes, is an element of mourning, which is not in the sense of mourning the way that we understand it. It's a matter of, it has been a flood of goodness coming at us, and now we're going back to the normal life, that this has come to an end. And in anticipation for next year, we have to wait to go through that season again. So it has been a season of abundant blessings, and it is the morning that it's coming to an end. The element of time is for those who are unaware of the calendar, for the both Jewish and Islamic calendar use the lunar calendar. The only difference is for Muslims, it's not fixed. It is purely lunar in the sense that it's alternate between 29 and 30 days, and there is no month every 7 years that is added to it to kind of fix it. So Ramadan rotates around the year. And I remember fasting in April. It takes about 33 years, not to give up my age, but it takes about 33 years to go around the calendar. And in this, there are lessons and there are blessings. So there are the blessings of fasting again in January when the time is very short. And there is the hardship of fasting in the summer. Also the challenges in living during times when in Northern Hemisphere, when the sun will set towards 10 o'clock at night and you have only very limited amount of time for sleeping. And it is a constant challenge navigating and balancing the tradition with practice. And that's where, again, the question that Dina asked about leniency is, shall we take the law to its letter and apply it no matter what? And yes, while we respect the law, we look at the licenses that God said, choose the way in between. And that would refer to the Muslim community as ummatan wasatan, a community of the middle way. Do not let go of the law completely and make it according to your own desires. And do not let the law restrict your life to the point that you forget about the ethics behind it. So it is a matter of balancing both the divine law and the ethics and the purposes, because if the law is not ethical, it's not a divine law.
Amen.
Amen, indeed. Thank you. Ameen. Thank you both, Sam and Kamal, for your very beautiful reflections and for engaging us in this conversation. Thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody else who took their time out to participate in this conversation with us. It is truly a very blessed time for all traditions. I think Easter, the holy tradition, the holy celebration as well for the Hindu tradition. It's just very nice to come together and share these thoughts as we make those. We talk about constraint and leniency or license, but just as individuals, as colleagues working together, to be cognizant that people are doing something besides just showing up to work. There's something that's happening within their calendars as well. So thank you so much for your time. I want to wish blessings for Shavuot and for Ramadan to everyone. And I want to thank Matt Hartman for helping us out organize with this webinar. Thank you so much, Matt. And before we leave, I want to just put a plug in there for our next program, which is scheduled for May the 19th. It's a Wednesday and it's a lunch hour program, so at noon, and we will be talking about psychoanalysis and Judaism and Islam. So stay tuned for more details on that. And once again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sam, Kamal, Matt, and everyone who came up. Yes, Kamal, I see you.
If I can plug in for the Interreligious Chaplaincy, the National Day of Prayer will be on May 6th, which is a Thursday. We're going to have a celebration that is diverse, led by students and faculty. More details will be coming to you. It's midday on Thursday, May 6th. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Thank you and blessings to all.